Have you ever noticed how some women seem to communicate interest without ever actually saying it out loud, and how other times you walk away from a conversation thinking everything was normal, only to realize later that you may have completely missed what was actually happening in front of you? And if you're an older man, especially, maybe over 40 or 50, there's a good chance you've had moments where you questioned yourself afterward, wondering if there was something subtle you didn't pick up on, or if you misread the situation entirely, because here is something most men are never taught properly. Attraction is rarely communicated in direct language in the beginning stages. It doesn't usually start with clear statements. It starts with behavior, timing, attention, and small shifts in energy that most people overlook because they are expecting words instead of patterns. And once you understand this, you don't become someone who decodes women like a system. You simply become someone who pays attention differently, more calmly, more present, and less reactive to surface-level assumptions. Let's be honest about something first. A lot of the confusion men experience in social and romantic interactions doesn't come from lack of opportunity. It comes from misinterpretation. You assume someone is just being polite when they might actually be showing interest. Or you assume someone is interested when they are simply comfortable or socially warm by nature. And this is where most of the frustration begins, because the human brain prefers certainty, but attraction rarely offers it in the early stages. It offers signals instead, subtle ones, inconsistent ones, context-dependent ones. And your ability to recognize them is less about psychology tricks and more about emotional awareness. Now here is the deeper layer that changes everything. Women, like men, are constantly managing perception, but in many social environments, especially around men they don't know well yet, women tend to be more indirect in how they express interest, not because they are trying to be mysterious, and not because there is some hidden code system, but because social risk is always part of the equation. If interest is misread, it can create awkwardness. If it is rejected, it can create embarrassment. So instead of direct statements, interest often shows up in behavior that feels safe, comfortable proximity, slightly extended conversations, extra attention to what you say, moments that last a little longer than necessary. And for men who are only listening for words, all of that disappears into the background. One of the most important things to understand is that attraction is not one signal. It is a pattern. A single gesture means almost nothing. A repeated cluster of behaviors over time begins to mean something. And timing matters just as much as action. For example, someone touching their hair once in a conversation is meaningless. Someone repeatedly adjusting themselves, orienting their body toward you, maintaining eye contact slightly longer than usual, and finding reasons to continue the interaction, that begins to form a pattern worth noticing. Not as a guaranteed yes, but as increased engagement. And engagement is really the core concept here, because before attraction becomes obvious, it usually looks like engagement first. She is more mentally present in the conversation with you than with others. She responds with more energy than expected for the topic. She asks follow-up questions that keep the conversation alive instead of ending it. She does not necessarily try to impress you, but she does stay connected to the flow of interaction. This is where most men underestimate what is happening because they assume attraction must look dramatic. In reality, early attraction is often the opposite. It is subtle, controlled, and socially contained. Another key layer is physical orientation. Human beings naturally orient their body toward what they are interested in. It is not something people consciously control most of the time. If someone is facing you directly, feet aligned toward you, shoulders open rather than turned away, it often indicates engagement. If they consistently adjust their position to maintain visual contact with you, that is also meaningful. But again, not in isolation, because context matters. If someone is in a confined space or a social setting where conversation is limited, orientation may simply reflect convenience. This is why interpretation without context leads to mistakes. Eye contact is another area where men often overcomplicate things. Prolonged eye contact can indicate interest, but it can also indicate confidence, curiosity, or simply strong listening behavior. What matters more than duration is consistency and return. Does she return eye contact after looking away? Does she re-engage visually after interruptions in conversation? Does she maintain eye contact slightly longer when emotional or personal topics come up? These patterns matter more than any single moment. Now let's talk about something even more misunderstood. Touch. Human touch is one of the most complex social behaviors because it can mean connection, comfort, habit, friendliness, or attraction depending entirely on context and relationship. A light touch on the arm during conversation might indicate warmth, but it might also be a natural, expressive gesture from someone who is physically expressive with everyone. So instead of treating touch as a signal, it is more accurate to treat it as a threshold marker. It tells you something has moved beyond purely formal interaction into a more comfortable, relaxed space. Whether that space is romantic depends on everything else happening around it. One of the biggest mistakes men make is trying to isolate meaning from individual actions instead of observing emotional continuity. For example, if someone is smiling, laughing, maintaining eye contact, asking personal questions, and slightly increasing proximity over time, the combined pattern suggests growing comfort and engagement. But if only one of those elements is present without the others, it means very little on its own. Attraction is cumulative, not instant. Now there is another layer that matters, especially for older men, and this is presence. Presence is not about appearance, status, or performance. It is about how grounded you are in interaction. People who are comfortable in themselves tend to create a different emotional environment around them. Conversations feel less forced. Silence feels less awkward. The interaction has rhythm instead of pressure. And in many cases, women respond more to this emotional stability than to anything else in the early stages of getting to know someone. When a woman feels emotionally safe in a conversation, she relaxes. And when she relaxes, her behavior becomes more natural. She does not overthink her gestures. She does not restrict her reactions. She becomes more expressive, more open, and more present. This is often where subtle signs begin to appear, not because she is sending signals, but because she is no longer filtering herself as heavily. And that distinction is important. You are not decoding hidden codes. You are observing changes in comfort. There is also a psychological principle at play called reciprocity of attention. People tend to mirror the level of engagement they feel. If someone is genuinely interested in your thoughts, they will naturally give more attention, more responses, more follow-up engagement. If interest is low, responses become shorter, more delayed, and less emotionally invested. This is one of the most reliable indicators, not because it is romantic, but because it is behavioral. Attention always leaves a trail. Another important reality is that attraction develops in stages. Initial curiosity comes first, then comfort, then emotional alignment, and only then deeper interest. Many men try to jump directly to the final stage without recognizing the earlier ones. They look for certainty before it exists. But in reality, most interactions that lead to attraction start in uncertainty and gradually become clearer through repeated, positive engagement. Now let's address something directly. Not every sign you think you are seeing is real. Human beings are naturally expressive. Some people are naturally warm, socially open, and physically expressive without any romantic intent at all. This is why context is everything. If someone behaves similarly with everyone, then it is personality. If behavior shifts specifically around you, becomes more focused, more consistent, or more emotionally responsive, then you are observing something more targeted. The real skill is not spotting signals. It is noticing differences. How does she behave with others compared to how she behaves with you? Does her energy shift when you enter the conversation? Does she stay longer when she could easily leave? Does she return to topics you mentioned earlier? Does she remember small details without prompting? These differences are far more meaningful than any single gesture. And here is something most men never consider. Interest is often expressed through continuation, not initiation. It is not always about who starts the conversation, but who keeps it going when there is no need to. People do not extend interaction unless there is some level of value or enjoyment in it. That does not automatically mean romantic attraction, but it does mean emotional engagement. At the same time, you must also understand that misreading signals can create unnecessary assumptions. Just because someone is engaged does not mean they are interested romantically. Just because someone is friendly does not mean they are available. And just because someone is quiet does not mean they are disinterested. Human behavior is layered, and confidence comes not from certainty, but from not needing to force interpretation. The strongest position you can develop in any social dynamic is neutrality with awareness. You notice patterns, you respond appropriately, but you do not jump to conclusions. You stay present in the interaction instead of trying to predict the outcome. Ironically, this is also the state where genuine connection is most likely to develop because it removes pressure from both sides. Attraction, at its core, is not something you extract from behavior. It is something that emerges from interaction. It grows through shared moments, emotional resonance, timing, and mutual responsiveness. And when it is real, it becomes easier to recognize over time, not in the first 5 minutes. So if there is one thing to take away from all of this, it is this: stop looking for single signs and start observing patterns of connection. Stop trying to decode people like puzzles and start experiencing interactions as unfolding dynamics. And most importantly, stop assuming that attraction must be obvious to be real. Because most of the time, it starts quietly, builds slowly, and only becomes clear in hindsight. And once you begin to see interactions this way, you will notice something interesting. You are no longer trying to guess what is happening. You are simply aware of what is unfolding in real time. And that awareness alone changes everything about how you communicate, how you respond, and how naturally your connections develop from that point forward.